Hey artists, while the time-lapse of Princess of Mononoke is running in the background, I want to talk about the GDC 2026 State of the Game Industry report and give my thoughts on it from the perspective of an artist. I think this report is interesting because it does not just show numbers, it gives a pretty strong mood picture of where the industry is right now, what people are worried about, and what kind of future many developers and artists are expecting. The 2026 report is based on responses from more than 2,300 game industry professionals. And this year it also broadened its scope beyond only developers to include producers, executives, investors, and a small group of students and educators. And from my point of view, the biggest themes in the report are pretty clear. Layoffs, uncertainty, and the general feeling that the industry is still trying to find stable ground again. At the same time, there are also some useful signals in there about engines, platforms, and where development is still moving forward. Less like a celebration of where the industry is going and more like a snapshot of an industry that is still under stress. There is still work being made. There are still games being developed. There are still tools improving, pipelines evolving, and opportunities appearing in certain areas. But the emotional tone of this report feels cautious. It feels like a lot of people are working, but they are working with much less confidence in long-term stability than before. That mood is visible especially in the sections of layoffs, AI, and students worrying about whether there will even be room for them in the industry. And I think that matters because the emotional state of the industry affects the way people build portfolios, apply for jobs, negotiate for salaries, choose tools, and even decide whether they want to stay in the game industry at all. From an artist point of view, that is maybe the most important thing about this report. It is not only about facts, it is also about the atmosphere around our work. The strongest part of the report, at least for me, is the layoff data. According to the GDC summary, 28% of respondents said were laid off in the past 2 years, and half of the respondents said that their current or most recent employer conducted layoffs in the last 12 months. That is a huge deal, because even if you personally were not laid off, working in an environment where layoffs are constantly happening changes the psychology of the whole industry. People become more careful, they become more defensive, they may become less willing to take risks, less likely to relocate, less trusting to studio promises, and probably more focused on job survival than on long-term creative growth. And for artists in particular, layoffs trend to hit a very emotional way. A lot of us already work in a field where identity and work are closely connected. So when the industry becomes unstable, it is not only a financial problem, it can also become a confidence problem. You start asking different questions. Am I good enough? Is my portfolio still competitive? Do I need to learn more tools? Should I specialize more? Should I become broader? Should I stay in the game industry at all? I think the report captures that indirectly. Even though it is just the data, the feeling behind that data is very human. I also think artists feel this pressure in a slightly different way than some other roles. When there are layoffs, artists often react by pushing harder on visible output. More portfolio work, more polish renders, more social posting, more pressure to consistently prove value. And that can create a strange cycle. The market becomes more competitive because experienced people are suddenly back on the market. That means juniors are competing with mids. Mids are competing with seniors, and everyone feels like they need to overperform just to stay visible. The report also mentions that students are very worried about their future. 74% of surveyed students said that they are concerned about their future job prospects, and they specifically mentioned fewer entry-level jobs, more competition from laid-off people with more experience, and of course AI displacement. And that concern makes sense, because when the bottom of the ladder gets narrower, the first people to feel it are usually the ones trying to get in. So from an artist perspective, the report confirms something that many people already feel. The industry is not impossible to enter, but it is definitely less forgiving right now. The result is that many teams are smaller, more cautious, and under pressure to justify cost more aggressively. That is bad news in short term, especially for job security. But it does not mean games stop needing artists. Games still need characters, props, environments, UI, tech art, animation, concept art, coordination, and visual problem solving in general. What changes is not the need of art, but the hiring confidence around it. That is an important distinction. The demand for visual quality and strong art direction is still there, but the willingness to keep large teams without clear business confidence seems much lower right now. Artists need to be more intentional, more adaptable, and more strategic than before. The next major theme is AI, and this is probably the most emotional charged part of the report. The report says 36% of game industry professionals are using generative AI. The most common use cases are research or brainstorming, then daily tasks like writing, code assistance, and prototyping. That tells me something very important. AI is already part of the workflow. It is not hypothetical anymore. According to the report, 52% of respondents think generative AI is having a negative impact on the game industry. That means AI adoption is rising, but trust in what it means for the industry is falling. And as an artist, I think that tension is very real. I think artists worry about AI for a few different reasons. The first one is obvious: replacement anxiety. Even if AI is not replacing experienced artists in production pipelines, it changes the conversation around what should be done by a person and what should be done faster, cheaper, or at lower fidelity by a machine-assisted process. The second reason is quality and authorship. A lot of artists are not only worried about whether AI can produce images, they are worried about when companies start thinking about visual work mainly in terms of speed and cost. Once executives and managers start to hearing faster output or fewer people needed, the pressure often lands on artists long before the actual tools are mature enough to justify the pressure. So when the report shows that visual and technical artists are among the most negative groups, that makes perfect sense to me. I do not think most artists are against technology. I think most artists are against being reduced to a cost problem, and those are not the same things. From my perspective, AI probably is going to stay in the industry, but that doesn't mean automatically that artists become irrelevant. What I think it does mean is that the value of clearly human strength becomes more important. Taste, judgment, style understanding, the ability to solve visual problems in context, the ability to collaborate with teams, the ability to keep a game visually coherent instead of just generating disconnected output. Those things mean still a lot. I think it's very important to show even more clear about what real artistic value looks like in production. One of the more practical sections in the report is the engine data. According to the GDC, Unreal Engine is now the most popular primary engine among the respondents at 42%, ahead of Unity at 30%. Unreal is especially strong at AA and AAA, where 59% of AA developers and 47% of AAA developers report Unreal as their primary engine. Unity remains especially common among older indie studios, while Godot is seeing some adoption among newer indie developers, though still at a much smaller scale. From an artist perspective, I think this is useful for two reasons. First, it reflects where a lot of production gravity is right now. If you are aiming at AA or AAA work, Unreal knowledge is clearly a strong signal. Not because Unity is gone, but because Unreal seems to be the default expectation more often in large production environments. Second, it reminds artists that software choices are not neutral career choices. The tools you understand affect what kind of teams you plug into more easily. If you only think about art in isolation, you miss that bigger picture. The more industry pressure increases, the more valuable it becomes to understand not just your sculpting or texturing software, but also the ecosystem where your work is actually used. I don't think that every artist now needs to become a technical Unreal specialist overnight, but I do think the report suggests something practical. Being comfortable with engine presentation in-engine look development, material understanding, and basic implementation is becoming more important, not less. In a cautious hiring market, the more directly useful you are, the easier it is for a studio to justify bringing you in. And that does not mean becoming a generalist in everything. It just means understanding enough of production context that your art does not stop at beautiful renders. Especially for stylized artists, that matters a lot. A lot of strong work dies in presentation because the artist never fully bridges the gap between asset creation and final in-engine usage. So I think the Unreal section is not just a software trend. It is also a reminder that production awareness is part of artistic value too. The report also points out that Steam Deck has become a notable platform in the survey. 28% of developers say they are making or optimizing games for it. Artists who understand readability, scalability, silhouette, texture efficiency, and platform-conscious decision-making are in a stronger position than artists who only optimize for beauty shots. That has always mattered, but in a more cost-sensitive industry, it matters even more. Another interesting part of the report is unionization. Among US-based respondents, 82% support unionization of game industry workers, and 62% say they would be interested in joining a union. Support is especially high among people under 45, people earning under $200,000 a year, and people who were laid off in the past 2 years. Even if you are not in the US, I think this is still important, because it tells us something about trust. When people are worried about layoffs, instability, unfair treatment, or lack of protection, support for collective organization goes up. So this section of the report is not only about unions, it is also about a broader emotional truth. A lot of workers in game feel less protected than they want to feel. And again, for artists, this makes sense. Creative people often accept uncertainty for the sake of doing work they care about, but there is a limit to how much uncertainty people are willing to tolerate. If I step back and look at the report as a whole, the message I get is this. The industry is still attractive creatively, but less comfortable psychologically. Years ago, the main difficulty was to just break in. Now the difficulty is also staying stable, staying relevant, staying visible, and keeping confidence in an environment where the rules feel less secure. And I think artists need to be honest about that, not in a hopeless way, but in a realistic way. You can love games and still admit that the industry is stressful. You can care about art and still admit that hiring conditions are rough. You can keep building towards a future in the games industry and still say that the current mood is shaky. Those things can be true at once. For me, a report like this is most useful when it changes behavior in a healthier way. If the industry is more competitive, then clarity matters more. Clear portfolio direction, clear strengths, clear positioning. If teams are more cautious, then reliability matters more. If tools are changing, then adaptivity matters more. If AI is increasing pressure, then human judgment matters more. If layoffs are common, then networking, visibility, and flexibility matters more. So I think artists should take this report seriously, but not fatalistically. The goal is not to read it and feel defeated. The goal is to read it and understand the environment more clearly, and then make smarter decisions. So if I were speaking directly to an artist trying to build or protect a career right now, I would say this: do not try to win by doing everything. Try to win by being clear, useful, and memorable. Make your portfolio easier to understand. Show stronger judgment, not more detail. Understand at least one engine economy system better than before. Keep developing your taste, not only your technical output. And most importantly, do not let the fear in the industry flatten your identity as an artist. Because the danger in uncertain times is that everyone starts becoming generic, safer, more interchangeable, more desperate to please everyone. But the artists who usually stand out are the ones who still feel intentional. They still feel like they know what they are good at. So to wrap this up, yes, I think the GDC 2026 report shows a game industry that is under real pressure. Layoffs are still having a strong effect. AI is creating a lot of concern. Students are worried. Many professionals feel uncertain, and the emotional tone of the report is definitely cautious and not carefree. But I do not think that the right conclusion is hopelessness, because when the environment gets noisier, the people who can bring clarity become more valuable. And in the end, games still need artists. They still need strong visual thinking. They still need taste, emotion, character, storytelling, and worlds people want to spend time in. That part has not disappeared. So yes, I think this report is a warning, but I also think it is a reminder. A reminder that artists should not only focus on making cool work, we should also understand the industry around the work. And if we do that, I think we can navigate the period much better. Not perfectly, not without difficulty, but with a lot more intention and a lot more confidence. So yeah, those were my thoughts on the GDC 2026 State of the Game Industry report from the perspective of an artist. If you want, I can also make more videos like this where I take industry topics and break them down in a simple and honest way from a point of view of someone actually working in art. And if you want to support my channel, like and subscribe and comment, watch the full video from start to end. This helps a lot this channel to grow. And until then, I see you in the next one.